Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. First question. When should you switch to a periodized program? I struggle to tell the difference between routine stalls and having extracted all of the new games out of a linear program. Well, the thing to remember is that certain periodization can be linear periodization. I personally have used, for a lot of the novice programs, I use a linear progression model. However, that's done purely for simplicity. When it comes to novices, if you don't mind using a more elaborate program, I have no issue at all with using a linear periodization where you run things in 3-week blocks and change the rep ranges. And in fact, this can produce just as viable of results for the novice lifter. It just adds an extra degree of complexity, and that can be a bit much for novice lifters who are starting out on their first structured program. It's not to say that it's less effective. So as far as going to an actual periodized program, it's purely a matter of when you're ready personally to deal with the extra complexity of dealing with periodization rather than pure linear progression. The thing to remember though is that for most people, you're going to tap out your linear progression at about the 1-year mark if you're drug free, and then people who start using drugs will probably be able to run that another year later beyond that. But at a certain threshold, that's going to tap out also. And they're going to have to go to periodization, but there's no reason you can't use a linear periodization model early on. Just keep in mind that it adds an extra degree of complexity to your training that some people might not really be ready for psychologically. All right, next question. I have a question, Jason. When I normally have someone make weight, I manipulate glycogen and water load, but I also make sure electrolytes are on point for health reasons. However, George L., I have no idea who that is, bro. A girlfriend advised that electrolytes should be dropped during water loading. She could not give a reason, but I'd like to get a second opinion on this if it would affect weigh-in. It may not affect weigh-in, but if you're dropping electrolytes down, that's sodium, potassium, magnesium, things like that, and you're in the middle of water loading to make weight, that is actually a potentially dangerous situation that will increase your chances of reaching water intoxication, which would be swelling of the brain, and it's dangerous. And anyone who's advising this is being extremely irresponsible. There's no real benefit to this. I've done water loading and dropped 18 pounds of water for weigh-ins for meets before, just manipulating my diet without having to do any of that nonsense. And the risk to it is just putting you at greater risk of water intoxication and even potentially cramping and things, because you're going to flush out too many electrolytes because you dropped them too low and you're loading excessive water to adjust your aldosterone levels and everything. That's a really bad idea. I don't know who this person is you're talking about, but they're extremely irresponsible. And I'd be very, very reluctant to take any advice from them after hearing something like this. And if they don't like that, they can come talk to me about it and I'll tell them personally. All right, next question. I've heard you say in the past that for drug-free athletes, it's almost impossible to get bigger without getting stronger. Is the opposite also true? Is it almost impossible for a drug-free athlete to get stronger without getting bigger? Interesting point. Well, the thing is, strength and size do go hand in hand outside of the neural efficiency and the neuromuscular component. The larger your muscles are, the stronger that particular muscle will be. However, there is also a motor unit learning and a skill involved in performing a given lift or a given function that is neurological. So what you're going to find is that the drug-free athlete will cap out their size where they're going to get massively diminished returns year after year after year. And their strength will drop accordingly, but no, it is still possible for even an advanced natural who's gaining less than a pound or a half a pound of muscle per year to continue to gain strength through learning skills, adaptation, other certain structural changes that will change in a muscle based upon performing exercises and focusing on things like joint angle specificity. So again, all the skill set training around the various lifts, it is still possible for them to gain decent amounts of strength while the size is only slowly going up. But you will definitely reach a threshold where that will be diminished also. But yeah, they can still get stronger, but it will never be the strength levels they gained in the first year or two. But they can absolutely reach a point to where they can, through those skills and motor unit learning, get a bit stronger even when they're not gaining size. It is absolutely possible. Just keep in mind that it's going to be relatively low. It's not going to be large amounts. All right, next question. Ice Cream Fitness 5x5 versus linear hypertrophy program. Which do you think is best for strength, and for hypertrophy. They both are. Both of these programs are geared towards strength and hypertrophy, and I really wish people would not combine these two together. I understand we're talking about power and speed strength versus hypertrophy, but strength in general versus hypertrophy are not separable. The ratios tend to be pretty close with those. There's a difference between that. 5x5 sets across is not power work. That is strength and hypertrophy work. And even then, 3 sets of 10 is still going to increase strength and hypertrophy at very similar ratios to the 5x5. They're not going to be dramatically different. So the difference between the linear hypertrophy program and the IFC 5x5 has more to do with the amount of total workload, time in the gym, and how much they're beating up your body. The 5x5 I have is very much a very high workload complete system. The linear hypertrophy program is a lower total workload. It's a little easier to recover from, oftentimes a little less time in the gym, and it's more customizable based upon your accessory work. A lot of people, I found about 1 in 4 people who run the 5x5 who still have good diet, good training, everything else is on point, still cannot recover from the sheer workload of the program. It just beats them up too much. There's a genetic component to that and a work capacity component to that. So for those people, that's really who the linear hypertrophy program is designed for, because when you cut back to the cutting version of the 5x5, you might not be getting quite the total amount of workload and time under tension that you really want for ideal size gains, which is what the program was written for. So you're trading that off for the better recovery. If you're someone who's feeling the need to do that because they can't do 15 sets of heavy squats and rows every week with around 80 to 85% intensity, that it becomes problematic for them. For those people, the linear hypertrophy program is going to be a better program for strength and size. For the others, it's the other one, but also not everyone has the time or the lifestyle to accommodate the 5x5. So again, people who can't recover, who have everything perfect, and people whose lifestyle won't accommodate the program itself, the linear hypertrophy program is going to be superior for them for both size and strength. For people who are in the other category, their lifestyle accommodates it. They're the 70 to 75% of people who can recover from it. The 5x5 is probably going to give them a little more size and strength. So there's a lifestyle and genetic component. It's not a straight answer. That's why I have both programs. All right, next question. How to fail a heavy squat without killing yourself or getting crippled. If you are squatting in a squat rack with safeties and or straps, is that enough? Also, any tips as far as how to drop it? Drop it off back or bend forward and drop it in front of you? Obviously, no one wants to fail a squat, but we should be prepared if we have to. Thanks. Yeah, last time I failed a squat was in competition last summer. But what I generally recommend is you use safeties. Never squat without safeties. I mean, steel pins are okay, but in a perfect world, you would have straps or chains. You need to set those to be about 2 inches below the bottom of your range of motion. So if you're squatting ass to grass, they need to be 2 inches below that. If you're squatting to parallel, then they need to be below that, because the thing to remember there, just because you can hit something to parallel doesn't mean you're going to be able to hit it 3 to 4 inches deeper. If you're used to squatting to parallel, that push all the way down with a heavier weight could pull something. So you need to have your safety set in an appropriate manner to catch the weight about 2 inches below that, because anybody can generally handle about a 2-inch drop, even with maximum weight, without injuring themselves below their normal range of motion that they're training with. So that should be sufficient, and that's what you need to do. You need to just drop forward, lurch under it, and then crawl out from under it. Do not drop it off your back, because the problem there is that this is something a lot of powerlifting officials and coaches have noticed over the years, that if you ever start squatting heavy and you decide to go do a meet and you're in the habit of dropping it off your back, you're going to injure spotters. There have been cases to where lifters who've done this have dropped 500 or more pounds on top of their spotters in the back, and as many as 2 or 3 spotters have suffered injuries that require them to go to the hospital to get treatment. This has happened quite a few times at me. It's because people pick up this bad habit that might be fine for Olympic lifting, but if you're ever going to squat with spotters at some point, you're going to injure your spotters if you get into the habit of doing this. And if you get in the habit of doing it, that's what you're going to do in an emergency, and you're going to hurt other people. And it could be the same inside of a commercial gym and a squat rack. If you knock that off your back and it bounces and hits the pins out of a squat rack, you could have 400 or 500 pounds fly off and kill somebody or seriously injure someone else in the gym. You're better, and it's safer for everyone involved to just lurch under it. It's not going to hurt you if you do it right. So that's what you need to learn to do, is dump the bar forward, lurch under it, and crawl out from under it. Set your safeties appropriately. All right, next question. My girlfriend has a tendency to twist on her squat. The left side of her bar dips forward and it causes the right side to go back. She hasn't had any pain from this yet, but a side angle shows one side in front of the other. Is this a major problem? And if so, how should she go about fixing it? She has some shoulder issues on her left side unrelated to lifting, and they prevent her from doing overhead press and bench. Okay, my thing there, obviously the shoulder may be causing an issue. So you're going to need to learn to find a grip width that doesn't put the strain on her shoulder to where it's uneven load with her shoulder issue. You're going to need to play with grip widths. She's using too much weight for her. You need to back the weight down, get the ego back in check, and relearn technique with a lighter weight of focusing on keeping it straight with a new grip width until you can find that sweet spot to where she can stay straight with both in terms of weight and grip width on the bar. Because yeah, this is going to cause uneven loading in her body, and this will over time contribute to potential injuries due to muscle imbalance, not just while performing exercises in the gym, but during physical activity or any sort of hard exertion in day-to-day life. This is not an ideal scenario. So that's how you need to fix that. Lower the weight back down, adjust the grip width till you can find the sweet spot to where she can maintain an erect torso that doesn't twist at all. All right, next question. Squats make me sore. I don't do them. I want to become the world's strongest man. Any advice? I'm just going to take the last bit with a grain of salt, because if you're complaining about soreness, you're obviously not cut out to be in the top 1,000 world's strongest man. That's not going to happen. So that aside, if squats make you sore, there's a few factors going on. You're probably doing several things wrong. You're not squatting often enough is going to be high on the list. If you're only squatting once a week and you're doing a bunch of volume on them instead of squatting frequently like most strength programs would have you do, then of course you're going to get sore. DOMS is oftentimes related to the repeat bout effect in a way, even though it's largely caused by micro tearing of the fascia in your muscle fibers. It does have a frequency component, so training more often can actually make the soreness go away from a lift. So if you got that, you're probably doing too much volume per session on your squats and you're not able to fully adapt to that, so you're getting sore. Number 3, you might be focusing too much on doing really slow eccentrics instead of just lowering the weight enough to be controlled on the way down. And again, eccentric loading tends to cause more soreness as a general rule. So that's what you need to do. You need to sort out your frequency, sort out your volume, and reduce the amount of eccentric reps that you're doing, with slow eccentrics controlled on the way down slowly. All right, next question. Pain near abductor and groin area when squatting deep. Doesn't hurt per se, but more of a burning feeling. Is this a simple strain? When I point my feet inward and squat, I don't have as much pain. Why is this? It's probably not inward. I think you mean more forward, because there's no way it's not going to hurt. Something else is going to give if you point inward. So instead of toes out, you're probably pointing forward. This has to do with individual hip structures. We know, and I've done videos on this in the past, that when we've looked at autopsies and skeletons of different people, that hip structure, insertion, and angle of the hip joint varies massively from person to person, and it's not even ethnic or race-based. It's people within the same ethnic group from the same part of the world have massive variation in their hip structures. And that's going to affect your different toe positions for you individually to where you can get proper full range of motion without straining things, putting undue stress on the joint, or certain muscle insertions. So for you just the way that your hip structure is built, it's putting less strain through that area by pointing your toes forward instead of out. And if that's the case, then that's where you need to go. Now, when you start adjusting your foot width further, that might change it again. But at the foot width you're using, that is probably more ideal for your hip structure. So you kind of just found that little sweet spot on your own. And you've learned that you're just not built to squat toes out due to your hip structure and your muscle insertions all through that groin area. So that's a good thing. You learn something positive about yourself, just work with it. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.